Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. I hope people in the stream can hear me as well. I'm going to try to keep you in mind and include you as much as possible. So today I want to talk about product research in the new era. So as Colette said, this hybrid environment that we live in and the remote world we've been in for 2.5 years is here to stay. So how can we make the best out of the tools that we have and continue to evolve as researchers? So in 2020, I ran my last in-person study. It was February, and we were revamping the information architecture of Slack. I just want to see a show of hands, because I'm going to refer to Slack a lot in these slides. A show of hands for who uses Slack. Great, the majority. Oh, thank God. You probably saw, if you've been using it for a few years, that 2 years ago we had a new information architecture, and we were doing bi-weekly tests on our mobile and desktop devices. And the session in this photo was one of 10 sessions that I ran over 2 days in our office in New York City. And I had the whole setup, the overhead camera, and we didn't have a fancy lab in our New York City office. We were like the more humble office. San Francisco got all the perks. But I had the team I was working with next to me in the room, and some people on Zoom as well. And I was running to them between the sessions and debriefing at the end as a group, and it was all so fun. And then 4 weeks later, COVID hit, and we all went home. And I feel like every talk the past year has like this COVID hit and unprecedented, but like this is the meat of my talk, so bear with me. And this shift, as you know, had huge implications on everything from how we worked to the apps we were using. And for us in Slack, we had a lot of new customers, and our old customers were using Slack in a whole different way. So we had to understand that. We put together a cross-functional team to, one, understand the implications, but two, also explain the changes we were seeing in the data. And I ran a study 2 weeks into the lockdown that was pretty unconventional. And it was unconventional because I didn't write a research plan, I didn't write questions, I didn't even select who to talk to. I wrote a LinkedIn post, and I put a link to my Calendly, where I had 12 slots over the next 2 days, and I asked people who are Slack users and who had to go home as a result of the pandemic to schedule time with me and talk to me about what changed and how their lives were changing. And over the next 2 days, I talked to people from Berlin, Boston, Beirut, Dublin, Munich, New York, Rome, San Francisco, Santa Cruz, and Stockholm. So 12 cities all over the world. And one of those people was actually Colette, back there. She was with her parents in San Francisco through the first phase of the lockdown. And there were previous colleagues and acquaintances, people I've never met before, an ex-boyfriend scheduled 30 minutes. And he was like, oh, okay. And there were like freelance designers and consultants, and there were researchers and people who we typically avoid talking to because you know all the tricks of the trade. So I'm not gonna typically recruit you as a part of my study. But I broke so many of those rules in this study because we had such short time and we were in a crunch and there were so many things that we wanted to learn. And what was fascinating to me was the depth and variety of experiences that I was able to access in such a short amount of time and with such a distance between us. I truly didn't anticipate that 12 30-minute conversations, and they were conversations, they weren't interviews. Like I was talking to them about what was happening in New York, they were talking about their lives, I was showing a lot of emotions and things that you typically don't do in a study, but those were the conversations we were having because that was the context we were in. We cared about each other, and I wanted to learn really how were they doing. And as a result of this study and all the work, of course, my colleagues were doing, a lot of product changes happened from status, what kind of statuses we introduced in Slack, from how we improved calls. We even started thinking about features. Huddles is, if you use Huddles, is one of those things that came as a result of this research. So for me, it was interesting to think about how remote studies in the past, they weren't new to me. Like I've done hundreds of them over the past decade. But typically they were reserved as a second-class research after in-person. In-person research was the golden standard, especially if you were talking about like a discovery foundational study, the richness and nuance were such a big part of. But all of those rules went out the window when we were in a crunch. And of course, now we live in a hybrid world, and there's no going back to things as they used to be. And I will need a really good reason to do an in-person study again, partly because now I live upstate, and the rest of my team has also relocated, because Slack is now a remote-first company. The other big thing that happened in 2020 was Black Lives Matter and the rise of the social movement that had mobilized so many people in the fight for racial justice and equality. And that opened the door for open and honest conversations about how we were doing as a society, as organizations, and as an industry. Have any of you attended UXRC in 2020? Any of you? Just a couple, 3 people. Do you remember the talk by Sekai Farai? So yes, it was so good. And it was the talk that stuck with me the most. So for those of you who haven't attended, it was a talk where she called bullshit on empathy. And she was like, bullshit, we're not here to build empathy with our users. We're here to represent the interests of our companies. So let's just take an honest look at ourselves before we say that we're here to really be the advocates for our users. It is a part of our job, but when we really take an honest look at ourselves, it is not about building empathy. So as a result of that talk and of the social moment that was going on, in our product research team at Slack, we had conversations about how we can do better. From how we can be more inclusive of underrepresented groups, to how we can evaluate our product. Maybe we should start working with experts and bring people in. So more about that later. But what we learned from those 2 events combined is that not only we can change, but that we must change. And when we do, we improve. Which raises a bigger question, which is where else have we been stuck? And where else can we evolve to meet the cultural moment we were in today? And honestly, I don't have a good answer. I wish I have a satisfying answer about this. I think this is something that we collectively have to continue talking about. And I would love to have a conversation later with you as well during the Q&A about how you see what your answers are to this question. What I do have are a few learnings about how we adapted over the past couple of years from my own work and from my colleagues' work at Slack. So I hope you can find nuggets of inspiration in them. There are 6 learnings, and for each one of them, I'm going to bring a case study or an example. And also, I want to learn from you. So if you have an example where you've adapted, or it's an example of one of those learnings, please write it in the chat for those of you who are remote. And if you're here and you feel called to do so, raise your hand, and I'll pass the mic to you. So here we go. Is this a better mic? Do I sound better? Ooh, I do.
I'll run them.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right, so the first learning is that good research is adaptive and sensitive to context. We already talked a bunch about this, so I'm going to keep it short. Have you heard of the acronym VUCA? Raise your hand if you have. Couple people, great. So VUCA was first used in 1987, and I think it was developed in military school in the States. And it describes volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of general situations and circumstances. Basically, we've been living VUCA to the max over the past 2.5 years. And being able to mitigate situations like that requires agility, anti-rigidity, willingness to go with the flow. And that usually leads to better outcomes. And VUCA is also a catch-all for, hey, it's crazy out there. So just to bring an example of a VUCA situation, and now we talk about this in VUCA, it's like a VUCA situation. My husband and I always it's like, this is VUCA out here. My colleague Lauren Rubin at Slack was working with a vendor in an international study about, I think, pricing and conversion. And the study was conducted in France over the past few months. By the time the results came back, the war on Ukraine has started and broke off. So her stakeholders were swarming to mitigate the business impact, and they had no time to really work with her on that study. So after she discussed it with them, she decided to put the project on hold, and the results had already come back from the vendor. And of course, ideally, she just wanted to close the loop. She could have put the report, I think I would have put the report in a channel and called it a day and be like, all right, done with my project, check. But she decided to put it on hold and wait for a better time to socialize and to workshop the insights. And I think that's a much smarter move, to wait until the time is right. So this brings me to the next learning, which is that trade-offs are inevitable. I was going to change it to unavoidable because it's a hard word, inevitable. We're always making trade-offs in research, whether you're conscious of it or not. You sometimes sacrifice depth for breadth in an interview, or full-on analysis for speed, or a detailed report for scannability and shareability. And those trade-offs are typically informed by your timeline, your budget, your resources, your priorities, or changing circumstances. So my example here is a competitor study. We had a team who requested a competitor study. They wanted to learn, what do people like about a specific set of features that one of our competitors have? Before a design sprint, we were going to build a feature that meets the same use cases. We didn't have resources to dedicate to this project. We're a very small team. So Matt Gallivan, who's my manager, Senior Director of Research, launched an unmoderated study on usertesting.com himself. He just put it out there, and he screened for people who use this service and who use this specific set of features, and he asked them to talk about what they love, what they use it for, and what they love about it. And the results from that was basically a video highlight and a bullet point list of the learnings. It was not even a report. It was just a bullet list with links to the video clips that he posted in the Slack channel. And the whole study, from start to end, took 1 day. Of course, Matt could have easily said, sorry, we don't have resources for this, or less easily looked at his team, shifted priorities, assigned somebody for this project, and if he assigned it to me, I was going to be a competitor study. That's like 3 to 4 weeks. Like, I'm going to go and I'm going to interview these people. We need the richness, we need the nuance. But really what the team needed is just a few insights for them to inspire what they were going into. They didn't need a full-on analysis. So the takeaway here is that sometimes we get paralyzed thinking about, like, what is the A+ solution to this problem, when really B or B+ would do. And that applies in life. It's an advice my life coach gave me when I used to be a perfectionist and I want to do my best in every part of life. And she was like, Raz, you're going to burn yourself out that way. Sometimes B or B+ is enough. So I do that in my life and my work now, and it's fine. I think I did a little more than B in here, I hope. So whichever situation you find yourself in, it's good to explore the different trade-offs and sacrifices before making a decision on how to approach a research question. Which brings me to the next finding, which is that evolving requires a willingness to try something new and maybe fail. And that sometimes means intentionally breaking the rules of rigor. Is anybody here coming from academia or has a PhD? Raise your hand. 3, 4 people. That's fascinating, because a lot of times in research, we have like a 50-50 split, people coming from the design world or the UX, and people coming from academia. And I find myself with my PhD colleagues having a discussion about rigor all the time. I'm not the most rigorous person. I go for trade-offs, and I go for practical and for where's the impact. And a lot of times people challenge me on my methodologies, but that's my style, and it works out. And of course, like, rigorous research and methodical research is the right thing in certain situations and in specific circumstances, and that's definitely true. But I find that in our everyday work, day-to-day, there's so much nuance and gray areas and constraints that require us to adapt and think of trade-offs and break the rules of rigorous research, like you saw in my example about COVID research. Another example I want to bring here is testing a collaborative experience. So if any of you use huddles, it was huddles here in question. And the team that I was working with wanted us to evaluate the discoverability, comprehension, pain points, and get feedback on value proposition. Classic requirements for a usability test. So I could have easily gone and done a one-on-one usability testing. But doing that would have only scratched the surface. It wouldn't have allowed us to see how a group of people are discovering this for the first time, or how it wouldn't have allowed us to authentically simulate a real-life scenario, or explore this from different angles, like the person starting the huddle, the person receiving the notification, the person sharing their screen, the person at the other end. So doing one-on-one wouldn't have really done that for us. So instead, I did this focus group inspired usability testing. I recruited 3 groups, 3 participants each, and I had them for 2-hour-long testing sessions, which is, at first, people were like, what? You want us to be there for 2 hours? I was like, don't worry, it's going to be fun. And we don't have to be online the whole time. We're going to break it up. So the way I did it was the first 30 minutes, I had introductions and technical setup. So they got to know each other. These are participants that I've never met before. So I wanted them to be comfortable working together as a group. So we spent 30 minutes getting to know each other and icebreakers, and then I gave them a hypothetical scenario. It was an exercise. What was the exercise? I think it was you're interior designers and you're working through a brief. And I gave them credentials to the service, or like to our Slack, and I had them do that exercise using the experience. And so they naturally moved from one part to the other. Following the exercise, of course, we observed them, and I didn't interject. So I saw them working together as a group, discovering it for the first time. So we were able to evaluate the entry points that way. Following that exercise, we interviewed them as a group, and here I use guidelines from focus groups. And I don't think I've ever run a focus group before, so I had to read a little bit about focus groups and how do you facilitate them the right way. And it was super interesting seeing that discussion unfold, because for the longest time we talk about like pros and cons of focus groups and how people talk over each other and impact each other, but actually like now I really want to do focus groups all the time, because it's so interesting to see how people debate an idea and to kind of like, you know, leave room for people who are less vocal to share their thoughts. The last 30 minutes was spent doing a written exercise. So I borrowed this from usertesting.com. If you do an unmoderated test, after people finish the task, you typically have the option for like adding written questions. So I gave them a few written prompts to answer in the last 30 minutes. And this also allowed me to speed through the analysis because I effectively asked them to summarize their point of view and talk about the pain points. So that was great. And there was no formula for how I've done this. I basically just remixed a bunch of research methodologies together to come up with this approach. And I didn't know how many people I should interview for this. So I was like, let me start with 9, because I didn't want to do research for more than 6 hours in one day. And then I thought I will just recruit in rolling basis if I needed more groups. So there was no formula. And what helped me kind of like break out of the box that I was in and think outside the box is this advice from my colleague Mike. And he said, when you learn to play the piano, the advice they give you is to memorize all the notes, practice scales, and make sure your timing is perfect. And once you've mastered these fundamentals, you begin to play with the music more. You might improvise a little, change up a few notes, play it in a different key, and kind of like that's what makes you unique. And it's like playing jazz. And like that's how I like to think about the research that I do. It's a bit of jazz and improv and rolling with it. So the takeaway here is to embrace a trial and error approach, and you'll come up with creative solutions that are focused on delivering value and less on doing the right thing. The fourth learning is specifically about remote research. And remote research really connects us with a greater diversity of experiences. And let me start by saying, like, in-person research and getting access to a great diversity of experiences are not mutually exclusive. The best study I've ever done in my life and the most fulfilling life experience was doing field research in person in India, Indonesia, and Mexico when I was with Spotify. It definitely allowed us to understand things in a different way and in a much richer way than if I had done it remotely. But that's expensive and time-consuming. And who can travel even these days to these places? I don't even know if I'm allowed to, if my company would let me, if I even suggested it, because of COVID. So in my experience, at least, remote research allowed me to gain access to people with vastly different backgrounds and experiences living in different locations. When I was in New York doing in-person research, I tried my best to do like a mix of demographics and ages and ethnicities and whatnot, but still the pool was so limited by people who lived locally and who can afford taking 2 hours out of their day to come and join the session. Now, a regular study can include people who live in Australia, a mom working from home, somebody who would have found it difficult to come to the office, like a visually impaired person or somebody who's a wheelchair user. So It's really incredible the amount of participants you can find online, and if you go to respondent.io, you'll be surprised. I recruited somebody who's a VP at Disney the other day. Like, why are you on here? Like, what are you doing? But really, like, I was talking to Brendan earlier from Respond.io, and he told me that over the past 2 years, like, it doubled or tripled the pool of participants. And you have people who are not just like looking to increase their income, but an interesting insight from Brendan is that a lot of people want a hobby or a side thing or a hustle outside their main job. So you will find whatever your criteria is, I think you'll find it, and you'll be surprised how quickly you can recruit those people. And it really, like, the incredible thing about this, it does allow us to be far more inclusive in our research. So I want to bring a few examples here. One of them, which I really love, is my colleague Mira Rao, who's a huge champion for inclusive research at Slack. She's done a lot of studies. I just screenshotted one of her messages here. One of the examples is a study about staying focused on Slack, which we're thinking about. We want you to be able to be focused on Slack. And for that study, she recruited half of the participants were neurodivergent. And I think that's brilliant because she highlighted the needs of a group that is often overlooked in this attention economy. And also, in a way, neurodivergent users are expert users in not being able to focus. And whatever solutions benefit them will certainly benefit everyone else. Another examples throughout the team include recruiting people of color, people in non-English speaking countries, interest-based communities, and also accessibility research. So that has been a huge focus for Slack over the past couple of years. So we had a partnership with Fable that allows us to do research very easily. We just we have access to their platform if we want to do it ourselves, but also we work with the researchers and outsource research to them. And in the past, like 1 in 50 projects would have had an accessibility research component. Now, easily, every feature that we launch would have accessibility research done on it. And that's really great, and it's very important. But of course, the challenge is that in a small study, you can't account for every possible human experience. So, and there are good reasons to recruit people who are representative of the majority, of course. So how do you address that? My advice here, and it's actually Matt Gallivan, my manager's advice, he gave it to me, and I'm directly quoting him here, is to slowly correct your blind spots and be hypothesis informed in how you recruit. What does that mean? If you're building a video experience, for example, then you probably will have a hypothesis-informed recruiting strategy that focuses on visually impaired users. And that way, when you start like being more inclusive from one study to the next, you start building a comprehensive view. When I'm interviewing a visually impaired user about this specific feature or testing it with them, I'm just going straight into the testing. I'm spending like 15, 20 minutes talking to them about their experience overall, getting to know them, understanding their experience with Slack, and that helps us understand their experience overall and slowly build this knowledge base. And a small thing that you can do today is, if you're lazy like me and you just duplicate screeners, every study you do, you just go to the last study and duplicate, you can look at that screener and look at like your questions and see if you can add 1 or 2 questions that can help you recruit more inclusively. Or you can even, like in some platform, have quotas as well. And the last thing is consider working with experts. So that could mean Fable, for accessibility research, or you can bring in somebody who's an expert to give a little, lunch bag, what do you call it? Brown lunch bag talk? I don't know what it's called, but when somebody comes and talks to your team and about the research. So a lot of people in academia do very extensive research, and you could leverage that. So try to invite people. The 5th learning is that people need structure to engage with your research easily and effectively. So when I was brainstorming what I'm going to bring today to this talk, my partner is a data scientist, and we were brainstorming, what are the challenges? What does everybody struggle with? And it is that people don't listen to us. Even afterwards, I did a survey. Every time I started a one-on-one with one of my colleagues, I'd be like, what is the #1 problem we all suffer from? Insights people. People don't listen. And we need to work on that. So if you work with a mostly hybrid or remote team, you probably find yourself working in a silo, and that this problem, if people don't listen to us, is exacerbated through this kind of like not being in the same office together. And sometimes it can be hard to gauge the response to your work or how well you're doing. And it's normal, like, people react to something, or maybe they write something in thread, but beyond that, like, what is the actual impact of your work? So, there are a lot of ways you could address that, like lack of engagement. You could set up share-outs, where you can do like in-person share, or not in-person, but a Zoom share-out, or you could keep bugging people and asking them. I'm like the type who bugs people, and every like 2 weeks, like, hey, what have you done with the research? Have you been citing my research? Like, hey, I saw your strategy doc, where's the citing to my research? And that's not really like the way you want to do it. I think a better way is to bring people in where they can like freely and effectively engage with your work. So I think that everybody's different, right? Like, you got to figure out the right moments where you can get people engaged and excited, and where the investment of their time is high. For me, the engagement during the research day and the data collection phase is the most important. I needed to be there observing. I needed to be there watching the sessions, because that's when I find that buy-in is the highest. So what I did was kind of like create a structure for how people are getting engaged in a way that utilizes social proofing. So, you see somebody, an exec, so I asked an exec, I was like, I need you for the first session to be there, attending the session, and I need you to do note-taking. Because when people see you do that, the rest will follow suit. So one, I leveraged an exec. And then I created a Zoom webinar. So I call it the digital one-way mirror, because you're with the participant, they can't see who else is there, and then people who are observing are also like don't have that pressure of like, oh, I should be, people will see me, or like they will see if I'm there or not there. I want to use social proofing in a way that doesn't put pressure on people but excites them. So I'm like, the first thing, let's do a Zoom webinar. The second thing is, instead of note-taking in a Google Doc, we have a project channel for each research project, and I do note-taking in threads. So as you see here for this session, we have 262 replies, and these are all notes. And that's much better, because it is partly note-taking, but part of it is also, we discover a bug, we immediately mention the person, and I also ask people to code their notes. So they put an emoji, if it's a pain point, or if it's a delightful thing, or if it's just an observation. And that way the team gets engaged with each other, they see each other write, and that seems to be really exciting for people. And we use huddles between the sessions. If you use huddles, if you're in a paid team, you probably have it, in lieu of being like running to the room to discuss. So we open a huddle between sessions, we talk about what we've seen, what we discovered, decide if we want to do something different. And as you could see in the last screenshot, people really engaged with this, and as a result, they internalized the learnings very, very deeply. So the takeaway here is that making impact with your research requires you to bring people along and make it super simple and dead easy for them to engage. And I'm just going to throw a plug again for Slack here. Like, between workflows and channels and huddles and threads and mentions and emojis, there's so many tools that really I think people should start using it more as a research tool and leverage it. Have a project channel for your own project, each project in its own, because that way you can like organize the conversation and keep it compact and not create more noise in other channels. I can give you more tips later about Slack and how to reduce the noise. So that brings us to our final point, which is less about research and more about who you are and what you can bring to the table as a human being with unique experience and interests and passions. I was also like joking around yesterday with my partner saying like, they first told us you're a unique snowflake. And then they were like, no, you're not a unique snowflake. But now I think we are a unique snowflake. And each one of us can really bring something incredible just by being who we are and showing what we care about and representing it in our organizations. So our team in Slack is very small, but it has people who are immigrants, people of color, parents, extroverts, introverts, LGBTQ, people from academia. And all of these people bring their point of views, and they make us much stronger as a team. And it allows us to see things from different angles and points of view. This happens through discussions, through peer reviews, but most of the time happens through seeing them lead by example. Like when Mira joined the team, we've been talking for months about how we can be more inclusive and we could do this better, but did we do anything about it? A little. But when she came and she just started doing it and not just talking about it, we started seeing the impact, and that it's not that hard. So that's a beautiful example. An example from my own work was hosting my own talk show. So I love podcasts, and I've always been dreaming of having my own talk show one day. And it happened that I heard, February last year, our CPO talk about the need to stay in touch with our customer needs, and that everybody needs to stay grounded and hear from our customers directly. But there wasn't a platform where that was happening. You could share research reports with people and they could read them, I guess, but it's not the most engaging way to stay in touch with people's needs. And at the same time, I had a ton of friends talking to me about Slack, how they absolutely love it, or how they kind of hate it, or reporting bugs to me like I'm their own customer service representative. So I decided to try and make my own talk show and bring people from all walks of life to talk to me about why they use it, what works, what doesn't work, and where they struggle. And it's basically a Zoom meeting. It's not really that fancy. And I invite, I asked people who want to join, and I had 182 people raise their hands. So I invited them, and now it's increasing slowly. And it happens every 2 weeks. It's minimal prep on my side. I just have my few questions, but really I just follow the conversation wherever I want to go. And anybody in the meeting can ask questions or give tips, and without an agenda, we discover things that we weren't even looking for, unlike a research interview. And content can be packaged and reused in town halls or all hands, specifically when people say they love Slack and how it changed their lives. We always take that and make a clip and share it with everybody because everybody wants a little pep. So I think it's been a great program with such little effort. So think about who you are and what excites you, and find opportunities to bring that and create a win-win situation. And the one thing I want to recommend here is set your own boundaries. Know what exhausts you and know what gives you energy, and just do something that brings you joy. Because as an immigrant from a Palestinian Muslim family, I know the burden of representation can be very real, and you engage in conversations. Sometimes you want to create change in your organization, and then you're like, okay, that is actually draining me. What brings me joy? And the other thing I want to recommend, if you're a manager or if you're somebody in a position where you can give people the power, it's important to create psychological safety for people to bring their fullest self and bring who they are, and try and maybe fail. That's very important as well. So there you have it. To summarize, good research is adaptive and sensitive to context, and this requires agility and anti-rigidity and willingness to go with the flow. Trade-offs are inevitable, so explore different trade-offs and sacrifices before you make a decision on how to approach a research question. Evolving requires a willingness to try something new and maybe fail, so embrace a trial and error approach and come up with creative solutions and your own unique flavor of research. And of course, remote research connects us with greater diversity of experiences, so make sure you take advantage of that. And of course, take care of people, make sure they're engaged with your research easily and effectively. And lastly, you're a unique snowflake, so remember that. We have a great opportunity to do things differently and to evolve the research practice. So free yourself from the idea of right and wrong and think outside the box. I'm sure you already are, so please share with me your examples afterwards or during the activity or in the chat for people who are on the stream. Okay, thank you.